Secretary Clinton, welcome. And we're here at Swansea University. We're at the law school with your name on it, and you're here to welcome the inaugural group of Hillary Clinton Global Challenge Scholars. So we're a long way from New York or Washington. How did this relationship come about?
Anna, it was the most wonderful serendipity. I received a letter in the spring of 2017 asking if I would be interested in an affiliation with the university. I am part Welsh, about a third is my ancestry, and there were people here at the law school who had followed some work that I had done for many years, and they asked if they could name the law school for me. I was immensely honored. I began talking with them. I came here. This is my fourth visit to Swansea, and I just fell in love with not only the area, but also what the university and the law school were doing. So I could not be happier.
And one of the global challenges identified by this scholarship with your name on it is cybersecurity. Yes. And you've talked a lot about suspected Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election. How concerned are you about the next one?
I'm very concerned, and it's not just my personal concern, although that certainly motivates me to try to learn as much as I can. It's what our own intelligence officials under the current Trump administration are also saying, that Russia never left our systems. They are involved in propaganda that they produce and provide to Americans, disguised as though it were legitimate news. They are very much behind a lot of what are called bots that flood the internet and social media sites to carry messages for or against candidates or causes. So I think that we haven't taken the threat seriously, and it's way past time that we do.
And of course the UK is about to head into a general election. Yes. Do you have concerns around that?
Well, I think there has been an accumulating body of evidence that there was Russian involvement in the first Brexit referendum, and I think all of us, whether you are for or against the current administration in the United States, for or against Brexit, should be worried about an external power trying to influence the votes of citizens. And as I said in London in a series of interviews, there is a government report that should be released before the election that does detail whatever the Russian influence might have been, because I think voters have to wake up and understand that it is an issue. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will vote for or against somebody because of it, but don't we want to be informed citizens before we cast votes? I think we do.
And on the subject of the election, Facebook has refused to ban political advertising, unlike Twitter. So who, in your view, has got it right?
Twitter has it right, because Facebook has refused to take down blatantly false advertising, and what Twitter decided was, look, we can't be the judge of it. That would be, too much of a burden on us, so let's just ban political advertising. I think that is the right decision. I'm very disappointed in Facebook. In the United States, slightly more than half of the people get their news from Facebook, and in many instances, it's the only source of news. So if they are being bombarded with absolutely false attacks on a political candidate, how are they to know any different? Because the traditional media, the broadcast and cable networks, refuse to run the very same ad that Facebook decided to run. I think that's another issue that we're going to have to address in both of our countries.
Facebook says it's about free expression and that all posts by politicians would be treated as newsworthy content that should be seen and heard.
Well, they are misinterpreting, as many experts have told them, what free expression means. Free expression doesn't mean yelling fire in a crowded theater. Free expression does not mean knowingly permitting false information on public channels. That has always been the rules that we have lived by in the United States. And, Facebook is basically saying, we're totally hands off. We don't care what is said. Yet the responsibility for conveying that information has to rest somewhere, and I think if they will not exercise any self-discipline, there will have to be regulatory and legal changes.
You've been in the UK promoting the book that you've written with your daughter Chelsea, the Book of Gutsy Women, which celebrates resilient and courageous women that we should aspire to. But at the moment, for politicians at least, it's a time of unprecedented abuse. So many have come out and talked about how they've had threats made against them. You'd have to be really gutsy to want to be a politician at the moment, wouldn't you?
Unfortunately, yes. I was really shocked when I was in London talking with and hearing from former and current members of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, about the threats that they receive online, the hate that is directed toward them. Unfortunately and sadly, we can remember the politically motivated murder of Joe Cox, a parliamentarian. And a lot of women are saying, I want to serve, but I can't take the risk, not just to themselves, but to their families, because in some of the instances, those who were hurling those threats were mentioning their children. It's a terrible loss for our democracy. We need to be encouraging people to run for office and to serve, and we need a diversity of voices because that's what a parliament should represent. So I think that the government, law enforcement, everyone needs to step up and say that they're not going to permit these kinds of threats, and they're certainly going to provide security to everyone who does run and serve.
And talking of running for office, you've been asked a number of times about whether you're considering running again. You haven't said yes, but you have said never say never. So what is it that you're weighing up here? What's under consideration? What would swing it?
Well, I never really seriously considered it, but I have been the subject of a number of people urging me to do so. I have no plans to do it. I think that there are many roles to play, many positions to champion that I'm going to continue to pursue. And I feel like it's not just about individual candidates anymore, it's about our whole system of democracy that is under attack. And I think we need a lot more voices saying, okay, regardless of party, regardless of position, we've got to protect the fundamentals of democracy. You know, the rule of law, respect for our institutions, civil discourse, minority rights. These are all things, along with freedom of speech and assembly and the like, that have built our two democracies. You're the oldest parliament in the world. We have been at it for somewhat over 200 years, but now I think we face threats from within and without, and I am going to continue to be very vocal about that.
And you and your daughter Chelsea are celebrating women who are courageous and resilient, but are also changing the world for others. So would you like Chelsea to run for president?
Oh, I don't know. I want her to do what makes her happy and gives her purpose in life. She's an incredible spokesperson and advocate on all kinds of causes, and I think she's very, very gutsy herself. But any future political decision, she certainly is not thinking about it now, would have to be considered and made by her.
But you think she could do it in future?
I think she could do anything. I think she is an extraordinarily talented person.
While you've been here in the UK, the first public impeachment hearings have been going on in the United States. President Trump has said he's been too busy to watch. Have you been watching?
I've caught excerpts of it because the time difference has made it a little bit difficult because of my obligations, and I've read all of the reporting and analysis, and I think that the testimony that was already presented is devastating. These are not partisan people at all. They are public servants, two very experienced diplomats who were just reciting the facts as they knew them, what they had seen, what they had heard, and why it mattered. Look, I have a lot of experience in practicing law, evaluating facts, understanding how it applies, and I was actually a young lawyer on the impeachment staff that investigated Richard Nixon when he was being considered for impeachment. And I think that the Democrats in Congress who are running this process have been very careful, vigilant about not getting ahead of themselves, following the facts where they lead. And I will not be at all surprised if the House decides to impeach Donald Trump.
So you think it could well happen?
I do, because I know from the experience with Richard Nixon, the abuse of power, the obstruction of justice, the contempt of Congress that were the allegations against him, we've already seen evidence of. It's pretty simple. Our Constitution talks about not only high crimes and misdemeanor, but also bribery. And bribery doesn't have to just be person to person. It can be nation to nation in the sense that a president would abuse his office to try to coerce the president of another country in desperate need of military assistance to protect his country against Russian aggression, that he would not get that assistance unless he manufactured information that could be used against the president's political opponents. That is exactly the kind of abuse that the people who wrote our Constitution were most worried about.
I want to ask you about a case here in Britain of Harry Dunn, a young man, 19-year-old man, who was killed in a road accident. The suspect, who's the wife of a US diplomat working here in the UK, claimed diplomatic immunity and went back to the United States. You were Secretary of State for a number of years. Does that sound like a proper use of diplomatic immunity to you?
I, first of all, just want to express, my condolences to his family. I can't even imagine the pain and suffering that they are feeling with the loss of their son. And I also regret the incident at the White House, which seemed quite clumsy and heavy-handed that they were subjected to. There is a proper approach to determining what is the appropriate use of diplomatic immunity. I think that should certainly be looked into, and our government should be cooperating with the authorities here in the UK to determine whether or not it was. There are clear lines that govern diplomatic immunity. Sometimes it causes consternation. We've had that in our country when something happened and a diplomat was able to leave. But then there are gray areas. So I would hope that experienced heads are trying to figure out the appropriate response.
And do you think that the suspect, Anne Sakula, should be sent back to the UK to face justice?
I can't jump to that conclusion. There's something called the Vienna Convention. There's all kinds of precedent about when diplomatic immunity applies, when it doesn't. That's why there should be this very thoughtful inquiry that our country and yours undertakes to determine was it or was it not appropriate, and what should be the follow-on remedies and actions depending upon the finding.
And you'll be heading back to the United States soon.
Yes.
Will you be watching the general election unfold in the UK closely?
Very closely. I do not in any way take a stand in the politics of the UK. That is up to the people here. But it really matters how the UK moves forward into the future because, you really are our very special partner. And when you believe, as I do, that our democracies are under attack from both forces within and forces without, we've got to get our acts together and making a decision, whatever the outcome, going forward or not, remaining or not, at least we've got to get some closure so that decisions can be made. There is so much that we have to contend with in the world today. And there are so many opportunities that, speaking for my own country, we are letting go unaddressed. We're not dealing with technology and some of the questions that it raises, including the very real set of issues around artificial intelligence. We are certainly not dealing with climate change in the sense of the emergency that it presents. We're not dealing with the refugee crisis. We have tens and hundreds of thousands of people at our border. Europe has been, really deluged by desperate people. What are we going to do about that? How do we help people stay where they are and have some kind of future there so that they don't risk their lives and also cause all kinds of issues for us? And the list goes on. How do we get the economy to work so that middle-class people feel like they're getting a fair shake again? And people feel like, when you say you can make what you will of yourself, it's true. It's not just a slogan. So right now, I think in your country and mine, we are all bollocksed up in politics of the worst kind. We are, not coming together, not finding common ground, not making good decisions. So elections should be always about the future, not looking backwards. And I hope that, within a year's time, both of our countries will be back on the right track together.
And just to revisit impeachment just for a moment, the impeachment hearings, President Trump calls it a witch hunt.
President Trump seems not to either understand or care about the law, rule of law, or our Constitution. And he denies reality on a daily basis. It's how he communicates what he wants people to believe. And so when evidence comes forward, as it did, from very credible sources that he was using his office to withhold military aid that had been voted for by our Congress in order to force a country's president to do his bidding, that's not a witch hunt. Those are troubling facts that need to be investigated. That's what is going on now. And sadly, he seems to only care about his own future, not the future of our democracy or our country. And it's exactly the kind of set of facts that our founders who wrote our Constitution were worried about. You know, we have elections, and they could have been sitting around at the Constitutional Convention saying, okay, so we get a bad character in, and he's doing things that are undermining our national security and, enriching himself, but we'll wait to the next election. But they didn't say that. They said, when it's severe enough, we're going to put a provision in our Constitution that can be triggered by an equal but separate branch, the Congress, to determine whether a president has defied the Constitution, defied the laws. That's what the impeachment process is for. The way it works is that the House of Representatives considers the evidence, and then it's like an indictment or a charge in a case, and they decide, are there articles of impeachment to be drawn or not? Then it goes to the Senate for a trial, and the Senate then actually weighs the evidence. They act, in effect, as jurors. It's not a witch hunt. It's a triggering of our Constitution. I don't know anyone who's happy about it. Even people like myself who are very worried about his presidency and how he's conducted himself, I don't celebrate the fact that he has triggered this impeachment investigation. It's not good for our country. It's a terrible remedy that is being deployed, but it's based on facts, and it's based on the law, and it's based on the Constitution. So as many times as he said it's a witch hunt, he's wrong. And at some point, he should accept responsibility for what he said and what he did.